Is there any background with this?
To live home. I love her. How to live
No, that's fine, honey. We all try, we say the word or you can't really die. Which one you say? Okay, go ahead. They want to when you say that.
He'll pick you up and turn you around. Place your feet on solid ground. I said he may not come when you want him, but he's right on time. You can't hurry down. No. You just have to wait. You have to trust him. No matter how long it takes. Oh, he's the God. You can't hurry. And he'll be there. Don't you worry. He may not come when you want. The Lord, he may not come. It may be in the evening. He may come in the morning. Oh, he may not come. He may not come when you want him. He may not come. Oh, he may not. No. When you want him. He may not come. He may not. No. When you want him. He may not come when you want him. Lord, he may not come when you want him. He may come in the morning. He may be in the evening. Oh, you can't hurry down. Oh, no. He may not come when you want him. He's right on time.
One back there, close up the right one there. All right, let's give it your best shot now. Let's build it. Let's go for it.
Job had to wait on because he knew that he would make a way. Just like the woman with the issue of blood. Back in those Bible days, he'll pick you up and turn you around. Place your feet on solid ground. I said he may not come when you want him, but he's right on time. You can't hurry down. No. You just have to wait. You have to trust him. You have to trust him and give him time. No matter how long it takes. Oh, he's a God. You can't hurry. And he'll be there. Don't you worry. He may not come. He may not come when you want him. No. Right on time. Job had to wait
we're gonna shoot.
Shooting this for the new news here. We appreciate if you join in a little bit with the kids.
It's a joy to have you here at our third annual Martin Luther King luncheon. So if you could bear with me for just a moment, because there's a slight echo here, and we'll get it together. We're running a little bit late on the program, but we would appreciate it if you would bear with us. They're setting up the luncheon right now, and we'll get started. And the people who have to go back to work can get started with their meal, and we'll get started with the program. To be here at this event is truly a pleasure for me, as I'm sure it is with most of you, because Martin Luther King was somebody who is a black hero who personally or indirectly touched all of us in our lifetime and is still touching us. So, like I said, this is our third annual luncheon. It's our third annual public luncheon. Let me clarify that, because prior to start having these public luncheons, we had 2 private lunches where the employees at Ford got together and had a quick lunch and went back to work. So this is our 5th luncheon, but this is our 3rd public one. So we're glad you're here to help us keeping the dream alive and keeping things growing. Thank you. The lunch will be served shortly, and the program will get started. I would like to make a couple of corrections on our program. The Honorable Councilman Clyde Cleveland can't be with us today, or he may be late. Unfortunately, there was death in the family, and he had to attend a funeral, so that preceded him being here on time. He may be here late, but we'll have a guest speaker in lieu of Clyde Cleveland, the very capable, knowledgeable, and honorable Ed Vaughn. So as soon as the food is available, feel free to proceed to the buffet, and we'll get the program started as you complete your meal. Thank you.
Okay, we're the picketing lane. I want to be the first black man on the picket line. For a moment, Memphis became a Calvary. Robert Guillaume will return in a moment with Patrick Duffy, Cicely Tyson, Louis Jackson Jr., and Stevie Wonder.
It doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
But I didn't plan to come here and to sing. I wanted to just come and see everyone and be a part of our celebrating what we all did. I'm very happy that we, as all people, our culture, could come here and celebrate Dr. King and to meet those people who, many of which were not born at the time, know a lot more about why it is possible for them to do the things that they have been able to do so easily today. And I would only like to say to all of you that we knew that it didn't make much sense. And there would be a law against anyone who took sin for the day in your celebration. But we all knew in our minds that there would be a time that we would set aside a day in your celebration. And I'm sure without question we do it. What would
We know now that it makes no difference where you live or how you live. Because of that dream, we're not afraid now. Because of Martin Luther King 2 years later, we went back to Washington with no fear. 2 years ago, many blacks left the South coming to the march on Washington, riding on the back of the bus. And we saw
At this time, while you're having your lunch, we have some entertainment in store. we're going to be entertained by the Keller High School Vocal Ensemble, directed by Mr. Wesley Smith. And if you thought what you heard before was good, that was just practice. Here comes the real thing. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Wesley. At this time, because late in the evening, the afternoon, for the people who have to go back to work, we'll get started with the programming with the guest speaker. As I mentioned earlier, the Honorable Clyde Cleveland could not be here because of death. But we have a return performance of our last year's speaker, Ed Bond, who's, like I said, he's very knowledgeable, and I'm sure he'll do a good job because we started to have him back again this year. We tried to give him a rest, but due to this unforeseen circumstances, he's here with us again. Ed Bond.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Brother Granberry. It is indeed a pleasure for me to be back with you. This is my third year of speaking to this august body. I had no intention of being your guest speaker today, so I really wasn't prepared, but if you're in politics, you must always have a speech in your back pocket. So I guess I'm somewhat prepared today. I'm sort of like what Shirley MacLaine is saying on her television program, kind of out on a limb. But I'm here today, and of course you all are here in memory of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Bob Jones, Brother Granberry, and all of the black automotive employees at Ford Motor Company. It is indeed a pleasure for me to appear again with you this year. Eleanor Roosevelt once said that no one can make you feel inferior unless it is done with your consent. No one can make you feel inferior unless you consent to it. I remember Dr. King said that nothing can stay on your back unless it's bent. Nothing can stay on your back unless you bend over and allow it to stay there. And in thinking about those two great people and what they had to say, I thought about the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I will just briefly say something about that because I know we know so much about the life of this great man. Born January the 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, the second child and the first son of Martin Luther King Jr. and Alberta Williams. Graduated from Morehouse College, 1948. From 48 to 51, he attended Crozier Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, and he was president of his senior class. From 1951 to 1953, he earned a fellowship at Boston University, and of course it was there that he met Coretta Scott King. In 1953, he married Coretta. In 1954, on September the 1st, he began his service at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, something less than 2 blocks from the capital of the state of Alabama, the home of Jefferson Davis, the cradle of the Confederacy. There was Martin Luther King there as pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. 55 to 56, the Montgomery bus boycott, where he had no intention of leading this demonstration, but he was sort of brought into it after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man. 1958, he was stabbed in New York City by a mentally insane woman at a Harlem department store. And he said, I remember that if he had sneezed while he was hospitalized, that it would have killed him. In 1959, he made his pilgrimage to India, where he again studied, and he went to the tomb of Mahatma Gandhi. In 1960, he organized the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and in that same year, he was jailed for not having a driver's license. In 1961, he was jailed with hundreds of others in an ill-fated protest demonstration in Albany, Georgia. He always said that that was one of his failures. Actually, it was not. It turned out that it wasn't a failure in the end. 1963, he had his great confrontation with Bull Connor in Birmingham, Alabama, the police dogs and the fire hoses that we all know so much about. Of course, that same year, 4 black girls were killed in a bomb while they were in church in Birmingham. In 1963 also was the Great March on Washington. Just before the March on Washington, we had a march that was even larger than the one on Washington right here in Detroit. In 1964, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. In Stockholm, In 1965, he launched the voter registration drive in Alabama, and there was the great Selma to Montgomery March that was aborted on about 2 occasions, and they were finally allowed to march by a federal judge. 1967 and 68, these were some very crucial years because he had gone to Chicago in 1966, and he had launched a plan to make Chicago an open housing city, and he ran smack in dab with Mayor Richard Daley, the mayor of the city of Chicago. That same year, in 66, he was stoned in the southwest section of Chicago, a place called Gage Park, by angry mobs who were against what he was trying to do. And of course, Chicago still is not an open housing city, as all of you know. 1967-68, he planned the Poor People's Campaign, and of course, the Poor People's Campaign eventually came off. April the 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, he was assassinated by an agency, by a feeling, by people who had followed him from the very beginning. We've talked about that he was not the man that he was, who really ridiculed him as a man. I think more of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI at that time. The FBI followed him from the very beginning. And I still believe to this day that they had a real hand in the assassination of this great man. Can I have an amen? Amen. Yeah. Now, what does the life of Martin Luther King mean? What does it mean to us? It is a time for us to reflect. It is a time to remember. And I think one of the things that we have to do at this time of year is not forget that Dr. King, as great as he was not the only one of us who was struggling and fighting during this period. I think one of the dangers of the holiday, and I support it 100%, but one of the dangers is that we tend to believe that, well, nobody else had anything to do with this movement except Dr. King. We live in a city, I think it's tragic that we don't even have black history as a part of the required curriculum of the Detroit public school system. I think that's tragic. Consequently, we may have a few programs this time of year about Dr. King, but how many of our children know who Fannie Lou Hamer was? How many know this great woman in Ruleville, Mississippi, who was willing to give her life and who actually died early, who challenged the Democratic Party at the National Convention? How many of us remember Fannie Lou Hamer? And how many of us remember Malcolm X Shabazz? How many of us remember Marcus Garvey? And the list goes on and on. And how many of us remember that Stokely Carmichael? And that Rat Brown, a man now who is brain damaged because of what was done to him by this society. A man now who sits and stares into space because he dared to stand up during the 60s for our freedom. Do we remember him? And how many of us remember those 75 or 80 members of the Black Panther Party who were shot down in cold blood in this country trying to stand up for freedom? And how many of us remember that right here in Detroit, a lot of our brothers and sisters died that you may come to where you are today? How many of you remember that we put A&P on the line here in Detroit and demanded that they hire blacks? We boycotted everybody, from A&P to General Motors to Ford to all of them, demanded that if they did not hire blacks in their plants, in their shops, in their stores, that we would refrain from buying their product. And we owe much of what we have achieved today to all of those brave souls, many of them unlettered, many of them not really knowing what they were about. We owe so much to them today. How many of us remember all of those others? This is a time to do that. This is a time to reflect. It's also a time to remember that we have responsibilities, that we as a people must begin to do something for ourselves, that we as a people must extend ourselves to our fellow man and our fellow woman. It has been said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. You can't be free unless you are eternally on the battle line. This society gives up nothing. Remember what Frederick Douglass said? Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And You find out how much oppression people are willing to take, that's the exact amount that will be heaped upon them. And these will continue until they are stopped by words or by blows or by both. For the limits of tyrants is prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. Frederick Douglass. And we must also remember that in this life that we live right here, right now, on this earth, that we must not be afraid. We must not be afraid to meet the challenge. We must not be afraid on our jobs. We must not be afraid to stand up for what is right. I remember that Kwame Nkrumah, the great president of Ghana, said the secret of life is to have no fear. The secret of life is to have no fear. Now, I have been thinking and reflecting on the television program that was recently on, that was on last night, Out on a Limb by Shirley, with Shirley MacLaine, who wrote the story. How many of you saw that last evening? Not many saw it. Only have one or two who saw it. But I think it's very interesting that the kind of thing that she is talking about is how do we get in touch with our spiritual self? I mean, do we really know that we are an extension of God, that God is within us? I mean, do we really know that this is just one of the lives that we will live? That after death in this body, that we go on to live, the soul continues. I believe that. I believe that that is true. I believe that we go on, and that we should not grieve so much over one who departs, but remember that that same one will be with us in another life. I believe that that has great merit. But I think that one of the dangers of espousing this kind of philosophy, especially among our people, is that we get the wrong ideas. And I see that this kind of philosophy of getting in touch with our spiritual self, and I believe that that is good in and of itself, but I think that it has the danger of getting out of hand. Because I can remember in this country many other philosophies that Europeans come up with, that whites come up with, and we are digressed from our struggle here in this place, in this time, and we forget what our mission is here on this earth. I remember that Ernest Hemingway used to write books in the 20s and 30s about the expatriates in Europe and how they would travel all over Europe, drinking and partying and having foolishness of one kind or another, and we got caught up into some of that ourselves. And then our expatriates went to Europe. I remember Richard Wright and John Williams and James Baldwin, they all went to Europe because they also were expatriates, but they didn't leave for the same reasons Hemingway left. Hemingway left because he couldn't do his thing quite like he wanted to. They left because they couldn't do nothing in America because they were oppressed and stopped on every corner. So they went to Europe, and the expatriate life for them was quite different than it was from Hemingway. But we got caught up in that whole idea of being expatriates. Then I remember that we came along in the 50s and the 60s, and Jack Kerouac developed something called the Beat Generation. And some of us thought we were beat too, and we ended up in Greenwich Village and other kind of places running around with beatniks thinking that we were also beat. Well, we were beaten. We had been beaten, but we were beaten for another reason. And we got caught up in that foolish movement, and then we got sidetracked, and we didn't know what we were. I remember that the man out of Newark, what is his name? He was caught all up in it until he found his way. And I'm talking about, I can't remember his name now, but I'll remember it in a few minutes. As much as I work with him, I should remember. But anyway, we get caught up in these movements, and we forget who we are. And we become the same kind of individuals that they are. And now, in this day and age, they have even new ones for us to get running behind. They have the Hare Krishnas. As someone said this morning, the people with the sheets who dance in the streets and beat little drums. And I know that we get to running behind them and going nowhere. And they got something else called hardcore. I know a lot of you older folks don't know anything about this, but they have a whole new group of musicians now who are into something called hardcore. They believe in a certain type of music. I mean, total ignorance, but we were running behind them. There were a lot of people who were buying the Garu Rajneesh Rolls Royces. He had 40 or 50 Rolls Royces that middle class and upper middle class whites in America were buying for him, and he was riding around in the desert in Rolls Royces and with red clothes on, and they were running right behind him like a bunch of idiots. And some of us followed behind him. And I'm saying that we must be careful today, that we don't get caught up in foolishness and get to running behind philosophies that do nothing but keep us as individuals and not make us see that on this earth, we have a mission. And I know that the mission that we have is based in our spiritualism. It's based in our African philosophy of African humanism. I know that we don't know a lot about it, but we must begin to study it more because it is the basis for the world. The only reason that African humanism got turned around is that Europeans came in touch with it. The only reason that they jailed Socrates when he went to study in Africa and went back to Europe, the only reason that they jailed Socrates, because they said he was preaching a foreign philosophy, is that he was preaching a humanistic philosophy. And the Greek society that developed as a result of the African society never knew what humanism was. Never knew what humanism was. Plato's philosophy was that the rich should be at the top and the poor should be at the bottom. You don't believe it? Read Plato's Republic. That's what he talked about. But you see, they got something out of Africa and then changed it and used it for themselves. And the whole idea of the religions that developed, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, all of them developed as a result of what they learned from Africa. The virgin birth came straight out of Africa. The virgin birth of Isis is on the wall of the pyramids right to this very day. They all got their philosophies from Africa, but the Europeans changed it. They changed it and they made it something all their own. And we must avoid that. We must not be caught up in the individualism of thinking about just me, myself. And we must remember that we must administer to the needs of our fellow men and women on this earth, at this time, this day. We must do that. And the only way we can do that is to know who we are. Certainly, we should get in touch with our spiritual self. I remember Ntozake Shange, who wrote the book for colored girls, the very last line. I mean, obviously, she came to understand what African humanism was, what spiritualism is. She says in her very last line for colored girls, I found God in myself, and she is beautiful. She said that. We all have God in ourselves, but we get sidetracked. We get sidestepped. They take us into other dimensions that we have no business being in. We must understand where we are at this time. And this is the same African humanism that will keep us alive. It is the African humanism that our ancestors talked about on the plantation. It is the African humanism that our great ancestors talked about from one end of Africa to the other and all the way to Australia and New Zealand before the Europeans got to Australia and New Zealand and killed all of the Aboriginal people. Oh, the problem in this world, and I have said it repeatedly, and I'm not afraid to say it, the problem in this world, and it's based on history, is that when Europeans came in contact with humanism, because they were so inhumane, they turned it all around, developed a philosophy of their own that was inhumane, and it is that philosophy, along with their guns, that have ruled the world. We must reject it. You don't believe that that is their philosophy? And I know some of you don't believe it. Some of you think I'm up here lying. Some of you think that, oh, they love everybody. Well, let me tell you what Robert Townsend said, the man who wrote the book Up the Organization Ladder. Because I know we're supposed to love everybody, but ourselves. Robert Townsend wrote a book called Up the Organization Ladder. And for those of you who are corporate executives, I want you to read that book if you haven't read it. Because Robert Townsend says something in there that I think we all need to understand. And you know, in Up the Organization Ladder, he talks about how you make it to the top of a corporation. And those of you who work in corporations and at break time you go to the Maalox machine instead of to get a drink of water, you know what I'm talking about, right? He says, and this is a quote, read the book if you think I'm lying, he said, most of us come from good solid European stock. Now he ain't talking about us, is he? Most of us come from good solid European stock whose record of rapacity, greed, and rape would make Genghis Khan like Gandhi. And that's what he said, unquote. And he said to go down without a fight. In other words, not to fight to get to the top. Not to adopt the Machiavellian philosophy of stepping on your fellow man. You know, Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince. You step on your fellow man to get to the top. That's how you get to the top. He said to go down without a fight is completely out of character. I am saying to you, it is that alien philosophy that we, so many of us, have adopted, and that keeps us from doing what we must do today. It is that individualism, that idea that I am me and nobody else matters. It is that I, me thing that has kept us from seeing the needs of our other people. We must change that today because the African humanistic philosophy is what kept us alive. It is what helped us on the plantation. You remember that during slavery time, they sought to bring us here to do the work that needed to be done. And we lost millions of our ancestors during the slave trade. You know that the historians tell us that the sharks would follow the ships all the way from Africa to the New World because they knew a lot of people would die. And we go around shedding tears for the victims of the Holocaust, and we had a Holocaust that would make theirs look like a picnic. We lost millions in our Holocaust. We lost millions in our Holocaust. Families were separated. And I remember that James Weldon Johnson, who wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing, said that when he was at in his hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, and he wrote that song, that he thought about the suffering of the ancestors. He thought about how they suffered and died being brought over here as slaves. And that's why he wrote the words, "Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat has not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers died. We have come over a way in which tears have been watered. We have come treading the path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy path till now we stand at last, where the bright gleam of our bright star is cast." He said when he wrote those lines, he cried. And I think that every time that song is sung, every time someone sings, "Lift Every Voice and Sing," not only should we stand, but we should also remember the suffering of the ancestors. The African philosophy tells us that we are all one. Those who have died, the ancestors, those who are living, us, and those who are yet to be born. We are one and the same. And that's why the Africans always say at the time of death that a good person dies only in the physical sense. His spirits and deeds are continued in the will and determination of his people. That means that for as long as we remember one, even in our lives, that person will always live. That spirit will always be there. This is African humanism. It is what made us strong. This belief in ourselves, this great touch that we have with the spiritual being, our touch with the Great Spirit, as the Native Americans call God. It is this touch with God that has made us what we are today, that has kept us alive, and that has made us accomplish so much under so many hardships. We must continue this struggle. We must tell our children about this struggle. We must not let them get sidetracked by foolishness and foreign philosophies. It is us who must save this world. I believe that. You got to save yourself first. You got to love yourself first before you can love somebody else. But I don't see anything on the horizon that talks about world humanism. I don't see anything on the horizon that talks about letting everyone live and sharing equally among the people of the world. No one talks about that. We are the ones who must do that. And we were here before. We had the earliest civilizations on earth. We raised the pyramids above the Nile. We taught the Europeans how to take a bath. We taught the Europeans how to play chess. We taught them everything that they know. We created physics and mathematics. Black people did that. Why should we not then lead the world once again? Each and every one of us have so much to give on our job, in our home. We have so much to give to our families. We have so much to give to our people. We have so much to give to the world. And we must know today that we have that strength. We must know today that nothing will stand in our path because we believe in ourselves. We must love ourselves. You know, a couple of years ago, I talked about our physical characteristics. And I always like to mention these because we get so hung up on them and we get turned around. We think because somebody is dark-skinned, and don't tell me you don't believe it, that somehow they didn't quite make it, that the Lord didn't give them enough of the ingredients of life. You know we believe that. You know you still call hair good hair and bad hair. That boy got good hair. She got good hair. Oh, she got bad hair. You still say it. Don't say you don't. Confused, mixed up, totally confused. Don't we know that what God gave us is what God meant to give us? Don't we know that our dark skin was given to us because we were the original people on the face of the earth, and the original civilizations on the face of the earth were in Africa near the equator, and the sun was hot, and if your skin wasn't dark or black, if the sun would have cooked you to death, and you would have died. That's why you have dark skin. That's why the melanin is in our skin. Because it protects us from the rays of the sun. Don't you know why white people worry about skin cancer today? The president has them cut off of him every 2 or 3 weeks. They're concerned about this because they cannot stand the sunshine there off of their natural habitat. Oh, we love the sun. We are people of the sun. And why do we have good hair like mine? Why do we have good hair? The good hair comes because it's curly, it's tough, it don't fall out so easy, it's good, and it was made for the sun again. It gives air conditioning to the scalp and at the same time prevents the sun rays from cooking out our scalp. That's why Jungle Jim wears his pit helmet when you see him on television in Africa. Tarzan never went to Africa, so he doesn't have to worry. He was always in Hollywood. So our physical characteristics were made for us. We have a wide nose. Why are we supposed to have one? All of us don't have them, but naturally, the people who were closest to the sun had them. As we moved to other parts of Africa, we developed other physical characteristics. The people in the Kalahari Desert are brown-skinned people. Some of them are light-skinned. The Aboriginals in Australia, some of them have straight hair. Certainly our physical characteristics changed as we moved away from the equator, but the original Africans had a wide nose because you need that to breathe. Tell Michael Jackson that. You need a wide nose to breathe better. Tell Stephanie Mills that. You need, these are people who had no jobs, you understand. Ashamed of their physical characteristics. Ashamed of it. And we cook our hair to death. I mean, we just cook it all off our head. Everything we can think of, And then when we finally cook it all off, we put wigs on to cover that up. I am saying to you that we must get in touch with ourselves. And I'm not advocating that we go back to the 60s. I think people are going to do pretty much what they wish to do about their physical characteristics. And living in America, if you go down to get a job, the man wants you to look a certain way. He wants us to wear these things here. I never could figure out what they were for. They're called neckties, So you got to do that. I understand that. But I think that basically we ought to understand who we are and be in love with ourselves. Be in love with what God gave us. Because what God gave us is beautiful. Because we were here first. They all came from us. The only reason they developed light skin and straight hair and nobody has because they developed from us as we moved up into the northern parts of Europe beyond the 40th parallel from Naples and Madrid all the way up to Scandinavia. They developed different physical characteristics because of the environment. And when we went towards the east, we Africans eventually evolved into Asiatics. We are the original people. We ought to be proud of that. And let's tell our children about that. And let's tell ourselves about that. And let us know that we are somebody. And finally, I always like to close my speeches with a call for us to do better. A call for excellence. A call for us to get out there and make the best of our lives. a call for you to do whatever it is in life that you want to do. If there's anything that Shirley MacLaine is saying that makes sense, it's that we have the power in us to do whatever we want to do. If you decide that you want to build a Ford Motor Company for yourself, it's in your power. If you decide that you want to build a business for yourself, it's in your power. If you decide that you want to be a politician, a congressman, or whatever, it's in your power. If you decide that you want to be a multimillionaire, it's in your power. You have the power to do that. You are in touch with the Great Spirit. You have the power. God gave to you the basis for what the world ought to be. He gave to you African humanism. There is nothing that you can't achieve. And I remember in 1945, Margaret Walker wrote a poem called For My People. And God knows in 1945, we were suffering. 1945, World War II had ended. In 1945, lynchings had resumed after we had gone off and fought the war for them. They had reinstituted lynchings. And our men went off and fought that war. The 92nd and all of the other great black divisions fought that war. And they themselves didn't even know what the war was all about. They told us it was a war to end the wars, and it was a carryover of the Great War, but we didn't know what it was about. We thought we were just fighting Hitler. It was more than Hitler. Because the war went all the way back to the First World War, which went all the way back to 1885 in Berlin, Germany, where all of the white people of the world sat down at a conference called the Berlin Conference and decided that they would carve up Africa and Asia among themselves. That's why we went to Vietnam, because at that time, the French were given all of what they came to call French Indochina, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. It was at the Berlin Conference that the British decided that they wanted all of the northern part of Africa, from Egypt all the way down. It was at that conference that the United States was also in attendance. That the Germans said they wanted Southwest Africa. That the Italians wanted Mali. I'm sorry, not Mali, that the Italians wanted Somalia. The French wanted all of French Equatorial Africa, Mali and Senegal and the Ivory Coast. And all of these Europeans sat down and they carved up the world among themselves. And the only reason they went to World War I was because they got into an argument over who was having more. The Kaiser in Germany thought that his cousins, his kith and kin in Russia and in Britain were taking more than he was. And so he said, I'm going to war. Well, he lost the war. And when he lost the war, they took what little he had. He had Southwest Africa. He had a few other parts. They took what he had. So they put great reparations on him, on Germany, for getting out of line. And so that caused the rise of a man like Hitler. And then after World War I, they also recarved up the world among themselves. And you remember W.B. Du Bois went to Paris and pleaded and begged that they give black people Africa, that Africa be free. And they said no. That was in 1918 in Paris, France. They told Du Bois to go back home. We don't care about you. In fact, the Americans didn't even want to give him a passport to leave the United States. Go home. You're nothing. We're going to continue to rule Africa and Asia. And so they went to World War II because they were still fighting over who would control the land. And when World War II ended, and in 1945, they decided they were going to recarve the world again. Well, the black folks said, no, hell no. We ain't going back that route. So in 1945 in Manchester, England, they had the 5th Pan-African Congress, and Jomo Kenyatta, and the Sikaway, and Kwame Nkrumah, and W.E.B. Du Bois, and George Padmore, and all of them called for the armed struggle in Africa. And the Mau Mau Rebellion took place in Kenya. And the Gold Coast was free under Kwame Nkrumah. And they said, no longer will we accept what you gave us after World War I. No longer will we accept it. And you know what they did in Asia. Ho Chi Minh said, no longer are you going to have my land. I'm getting it back. And he had been taught, Ho Chi Minh was a member of the Marcus Garvey movement here in America. He had been taught well. And when he went back, he took care of business. And even today, Saigon is called Ho Chi Minh City. They took care of business. They took their land back. Unfortunately, we all died, not knowing that it goes all the way back to the Berlin Conference. We were fighting over somebody else's argument about how much of this world they would control. It's all history. It's all there reading. So in 1945, I'm sure Margaret Walker thought about all of these things. And she made a plea to our people to do something for ourselves. Let a new earth rise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and a strength of final clinching be the pulse in our spirits and our bloods. Let the songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men and women now rise and take control. Happy birthday, Dr. King. Thank you. Next year we'll have 5 people.
Thank you, Ed, for that tremendous speech. Now you see why we don't give Ed much advance notice after that speech there. But at this point in the program, I'd like to ask Ed to stay here for a minute, and I'd like to ask our president, Doug Miller, to come forward and present some awards and also
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Ed, for that stirring, educational, and very eloquent presentation. Every year, Ed comes out, and his name is almost synonymous with our Martin Luther King luncheon because we don't know any other way to do it. And Ed does a fine job for us, and we'd like to thank you very much, Ed. Well, we've been given this luncheon. This is our 3rd annual luncheon, and every year it's been growing thanks to you for coming out. We'd like to thank all of you for coming out because without you there would be no reason to give this luncheon. And really, this is the type of thing that Martin Luther King worked for. When Martin Luther King started off in Selma, Alabama, when Rosa Parks decided that she was no longer going to ride on the back of the bus, she said she had enough. Even Martin Luther King himself was amazed that black people, 381 days, walked, caught the bus, got rides with each other to avoid catching the bus system that discriminated against them. And to keep something like this going is what he really wanted. It was what the dream was really all about. Like when he was in Chicago in the late part of his struggle, and he sensed himself that the movement was beginning to lose its momentum. And he felt that if we could only keep people interested in the movement. And for some reason, people have lost interest. People are content. People don't feel there's a reason to struggle anymore. And that's one of the reasons why we have the children out here today. Because the children, the younger generation, they don't know about King. You know about King. You grew up. You watched him. You watched what happened. You saw the way things were. You know about what happened. The children don't know what happened. And those are the ones who really have to be told why there was a dream, what the dream is all about, and how to keep the dream alive. If Martin Luther King was here today, I'm sure he wouldn't want us to sit up here and tell everybody about all of his accomplishments, all the things that he did, he was able to do. I'm sure he would want to tell us maybe about his failures, about maybe how the movement lost momentum, about how we can achieve that dream. And that's why every year we have this luncheon and come back here every year and talk about it on his birthday, talk about how we can keep the movement alive. One of the things is right here today, the solidarity that we show when we come in and we sit down and have lunch and remember Martin Luther King. And I'd like to thank everybody for that solidarity. That's what we need. And that's what we need to fulfill the dream. And hopefully we're going to get more momentum. We're going to get more people to join us next year, the year after, and we're going to see that dream. Maybe Martin Luther King didn't make it to the mountaintop with us, and he saw the other side before we got there. But we're going to get there if we pull together, and that's what this is all about. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening. At this time, I'd like to call up Mr. Metro, Mr. Will Holmes. Will, could you come on up here? Yeah, you. I know you weren't. One of the things that we realize would not happen, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people ask us, how come you have your affairs at the Metro all the time? How come this is at the Metro and that's at the Metro? Well, the reason why is because of Mr. Metro. Because Will Holmes, in case you don't know him. Will, my main man, my friend. Will has been very instrumental in this Martin Luther King luncheon. He has done all the things that we've asked him to do. He's encouraged and helped us and worked with us and done a lot of things for our organization. And as a little momentum and tribute from our organization, we'd like to present him with a little plaque, King for a holiday for King. Thank you, Will.
We look for this in our trophy case, and I'd like to thank the employees who started this affair 3 years ago. And I can't say thank you enough, and I'm just glad to be here, able to do what we do together. Thank you.
Mr. Wesley Smith, would you come up here, please? Wesley Smith is the instructor who heads up the Kettering Vocal Ensemble, who provided the music for us and the vocals for our... They've been coming to our annual banquets and to our Martin Luther King luncheons, and we'd like to give them a little something to mark that day. Enjoy the tapes, enjoy whatever, the ambiance, keep being warm to each other, and thank you very much.
Of course, Dr. Martin Luther King was a Georgia peach, and we have some Georgia peaches in the form of peach cobbler if you like some desserts right up front. We still have some video tapes to view. You're welcome to enjoy some dessert with us.
His film, television, stage, and recording star, the inimitable Debbie Allen.
celebration and mementos to front Martin Luther King Day. Okay, we have the Black Achievers coloring book on sale. So we appreciate all donations toward these very, very worthy items, okay? Black Achievers coloring book, other Martin Luther King Day mementos and souvenirs.
For anybody that's interested, this Black Achievers coloring book is a coloring book depicting the inventions of a lot of our black inventors. It's a very good educational gift for you to present to you.
And a wreath-laying ceremony in King's hometown of Atlanta.
Glory, glory.
King's widow, Coretta, surrounded by family and friends, marked this his 58th birthday. Inside the church King once pastored, a service at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and speeches to remind America where it has been and how far it has yet to go.
We're called to love those who hate us. We're called to understand the oppressed and the oppressor. We're called to believe that the rejected stone with faith can become the cornerstones of a new order.
Secretary of State George Shultz was the keynote speaker.
The struggle never ends because freedom must be won anew every day. The threat to freedom never ceases. Howard Beach, Forsyth County, just the names of places, but already they are coming to stand for everything Dr. King fought against.
The service was followed by a parade down Peachtree Street. In San Antonio, Texas, meanwhile, Rosa Parks of Detroit was honored. Her defiance launched the bus boycott in Alabama and the civil rights movement. Even in Arizona, where Dr. King's birthday was repealed as a national holiday, thousands turned out to protest and at the same time remember the dream and the dreamer.
Detroit remembered that dream tonight as well downtown, despite all this snow. Some 700 folks gathered at Cobo to celebrate the birthday of Dr. King. Prayers, singing, speeches. Roseanne Sarah attended the gathering and joins me now live in the newsroom. Roseanne, fill us in.
Bruce, well, when I was standing inside Cobo Hall, a stranger came up to me and said, you know, King was more than a man. He was the Lord in the man, and it was that inner force that directed him, and he, in turn, directed so many million more.
More than 300 voices sang of freedom inside Cobo Arena. Equality is what Martin Luther King died for, and that is how many remember him.
We probably have one of the highest percentages of black population of any city in America. We have the absolute highest unemployment. That's not equality.
To some, King inspired more than freedom.
When I reflect upon the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King, I think of education. When education was the priority of the black community, we were a people of pride, hope, determination, with goals in mind for ourselves and for our children.
King was more than a leader for black Americans. He was a world leader whose inspiration transcended all color lines.
I'm here because I think he's probably the greatest person of this century.
His dream gives me a lot of energy to do things for people. My dream for myself is to become a teacher.
Now, despite his death, King's hope for a brighter world continues. One of the committee members at tonight's celebration said if King were alive today, his concerns would be drugs, teen pregnancies, unemployment, and the nuclear buildup. Bruce?
I think you're right. I think he'd be one busy man tonight if he were still alive. Thanks, Roseanne Sarah. Dr. Martin Luther King.
The snowstorm took its toll on tonight's tribute to Martin Luther King in Cobo Arena. The crowd was considerably less than the 10,000 people who attended last year's program there, but those who were able to make it tonight did his memory justice. 900 voices from 75 church choirs sang out in Cobo Arena tonight to honor Dr. Martin Luther King. They came from southeastern Michigan, Ohio, and Canada.
We gather here for the second official birthday celebration
of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Channel 4's Gerald Harrington acted as master of ceremonies in the tribute that included a host of local and state officials. And Mayor Coleman Young, who has been vocal about the forces of racism in this area, spoke of harmony.
We ought to extend the hand of unity. That's what Dr. King means to America and the world.
Much of Cobo Arena was empty, the consequence of today's snowstorm.
There were many who did come tonight, though, despite the weather. People who felt it was important to be here, whatever the inconvenience.
Dr. King made such a contribution to minority groups everywhere till I felt it was small matter for me to get out in the snow, as we call it, and get out to help commemorate what he's done.
The impact of what he was fighting for and the things he stood for are making my life a better place, and I'm just here to show my appreciation for it.
Most of the people I spoke with told me they felt it was their duty to show up at Cobo Arena tonight. As one person put it, after what Dr. King faced, the dogs and fire hoses and hatred, a little snow.
The year was 1963. The crowd was vast, and Dr. King was never more eloquent. His I Have a Dream speech, first presented here in Detroit, used the great symbols of our nation, the words of the Declaration of Independence, the majesty of the Lincoln Monument, to show that the civil rights movement was not so much a black struggle, but an epic American struggle. 5 years later, Dr.
It's not my fault that anyone is born in a ghetto.
And it's not my fault you drew an orange.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. How do you teach young people what inequality and injustice are all about? Tonight we'll show you how one teacher brought the lesson home to his students. We'll talk to him and some of them.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
We're in one of our ABC newsrooms, and in a moment we're going to meet